Hello YouTube, this is Neon. Today, the title of my talk is going to be John Leonard Orr. John Leonard Orr was, or is, he was a serial arsonist. He's considered to be one of the most prolific serial arsonists in the history of the United States. He was a Glendale, city of Glendale, arson investigator. He, after a lot of trial and struggle, was able to get into the rather modest city of Glendale fire department and become a firefighter, and he worked his way up to becoming an arson investigator. One of his fires killed 4 people in, it might have been an arts and crafts store. Something along those lines. I believe it was an arts and crafts store, a very large one. Of those 4 people that were killed, there was a little boy who was 2 and who was just shy of 3 years old. This little boy's name was Matthew. And this sicko, I don't want to say sicko, this evil and perverse man, John Leonard Orr, wrote a novel about an arson investigator who goes rogue, possibly might be the right terminology, and begins to start a series of fires. And believe it or not, he actually includes the name of Matthew as one of the victims of the fire. And I'm not sure if this is correct, but in his fictional novel, I believe one of the stores that the arson investigator in his so-called fictional novel, one of the fires that he provoked, 4 people die, and again, Matthew is the name of one of the victims. Before I continue, I want to say that more than just the evil and perverseness of this serial arsonist is human evil and human behavior that really goes outside of what John Leonard Orr himself did and what he perpetrated. Okay, that's only tangentially, that's only related in a tangential, tangentially related, I don't know. It's a tangent to him, but I will get to that shortly. One other thing that was particularly interesting and perverse about this man, he videoed a home before he set it on fire. He videoed the home as it was burning before, and I believe as it was burning before the fire department got there and began to extinguish it. He videoed them as they were arriving, and then he videoed the home after the fire had burned out, and the home was just a burned out skeleton of what it had been before. He actually had this video. They said that he was doing like many serial killers do, where they record their crimes either on video or they take pictures so that they can relive that experience. Now, he, in his book, that they found as they were investigating him, the, I don't even remember the title of his stupid book, but the main character who in his book, that obviously is him, right? He's writing about himself. The main character says that the fire had become a lover and a concubine to him, and he really didn't care about the victims. All he cared about was setting fires. He ultimately wound up being convicted of the 4 murders that were a result of one of his arson attacks. And he got life without the possibility of parole. Thank God this man cannot start any more fires, considering that he is suspected for having started 1,000 fires. They were saying that it may have been just the year before he was arrested and confined and convicted, or it may have been for more than 1 year. But they said there were 67 fires in and around the Glendale area before he was arrested. And then after, and I think this was an average of 67 per year, and then after he was arrested and confined and convicted, there was an average of 1. So that's what they call circumstantial, but it's pretty powerful circumstantial evidence to suggest how prolific he was. Now, tangent. Human evil outside of John Leonard Orr and his own human evil, thinking that he was God and he could cause this kind of horror to feed his ego or whatever his motive was. There was a arson investigator who suspected that a certain series of arson attacks were being committed by an arson investigator. And he had deduced, or he had narrowed it down to 55 names of arson investigators who had gone to a particular arson investigators conference where during the dates of that conference and along a certain route leading to the conference, there was a series of arsons that were taking place along a particular route. So he looked at all of the arson investigators that went to this conference that went along this route. That's how he was able to reduce it to 55 particular people who had taken that route to get there. The same thing happened at another arson investigator conference, and he was able to reduce that to 10 names because there were only 10 people who went to both conferences. And likewise, the same MO, where fires had been provoked along another route leading to a different location for a conference for fire arson investigators. Now, here's where the human evil comes in. When he initially brought this information to his superiors, they wanted to have nothing to do with it. They didn't like the idea that someone was trying to suggest that an arson investigator was perpetrating this evil. They didn't want to look bad, and they didn't want to investigate. Arson investigators, they don't investigate their own. They don't hold their own accountable. They did not in this situation, I know that, with that one exception. There was him, and there was maybe 1 or 2 other people that really knew he had a case. But the majority of his superiors wanted nothing to do with it, initially refused to even take him seriously. As an arson investigator himself, he went to conferences for arson investigators. And what happened was that it got to the point that he couldn't even talk about it. Arson investigators wouldn't even listen to him. He became rejected and repudiated within the arson investigators community. Very unfortunate. With the 55 names, they refused to take fingerprints. They said, well, it's too much work. With the 10 names, they ultimately did take their fingerprints, and there were no matches. What they then decided to do was, because they miraculously found a fingerprint on one of the devices he used to start these fires. So that's how they were trying to match this fingerprint. They decided to go back and look at all the people who applied for positions within the fire department within a certain, relevant, pertinent area, and then they found a match. And that match, I believe, was one of the 10. However, what happened was that they overlooked the fingerprint. Somehow, whoever was responsible for the fingerprints didn't make this accurate match. They did, however, when they matched it against the same person's fingerprints that had been taken as part of his job application. It was as if, I had the impression it was as if fire arson investigators were so determined that this was not going to be an arson investigator who was guilty of this, that they didn't even match the fingerprints. It's just very interesting that they could have stopped a lot of these fires had they taken this man seriously. Obviously, this man, who is a fire arson investigator, put his job at risk, probably, put his reputation at risk, put his livelihood at risk. So I congratulate him. I send out my love to him. He is an example and a hero to all of us for really pushing through, because at that time, no fire arson investigators were taking him seriously or were even looking in the direction that he was looking in. I can only suspect that this dude's arsons, or Leonard Orr, that his arsons were too good. And that may have played a role in this particular arson investigator saying, it's one of us. It's one of us who's doing this. It reminds me of how I had put in a complaint after being beaten and robbed. I put in a complaint against the police who came to do the investigation, who initially came, because they did not interview two different people. And when I put in the complaint that, hey, they didn't interview a security guard who saw part of the crime, that was the main person. There was a homeless person who was right where I was beaten and robbed, but he never moved and never took the covers off of his head or her head. So I don't have any reason to believe that they could have been any help. They may have been just completely drunk, or they may have pretended that they were completely, I don't know. I still think they should have tried to wake that person up and interview them as well. But the security guard, definitely. When I went and put in my complaint, the watch commander, one of the higher up police officers, took him forever to find the report. He came out and told me, with his, I still had a big busted eye. It looked like my eye almost popped, because not only did I have a black eye, but my eye was cut up from my glasses, which were broken right when he popped me in the face. He brings out this report, this higher ranking police officer, and says, yeah, they investigated everybody they were supposed to investigate. Look, it says it right there in the report. And in the report, this was already part of the paperwork. It was already printed on the paperwork as part of the normal print that's already on the paperwork that says, investigate all of the relevant people in the area. It was part of what is written on the report already. It wasn't written by their hand or typed in or anything like that. And I remember I just looked at him knowing I'm not going to get any help or any justice. Thank God. Thank God I wasn't killed, right? Thank God I don't have broken bones. Most of the scars have gone away. Those that are there are minor and are not visible. But I remember telling him, protect and serve your own. And he looked at me and said, no, that's not what I'm doing. And I just was like, yeah. And I walked away. I knew I wasn't going to get any help. The police don't hold the police accountable, or they rarely do. And unfortunately, I believe that when they do, they're probably going to be repudiated and considered a pariah, just like this arson investigator, who I venture was completely vindicated when they did catch this guy and all these fires stopped. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share, comment commercials, recommend my videos. Do one or more of those things. Thank you, and best wishes.